community and British Columbians should be commended for this. We have all rolled up our sleeves because we knew it was the best way to put the pandemic behind us and in securing our economic future. In Vancouver especially, we know that there can be no economic recovery until business and tourism travel can begin again. Today, we are calling on the federal government to take a science-based approach and remove costly PCR testing requirements for cross-border travel. The federal government's own expert panel, in fact, does not recommend the approach. They said it's unnecessary for fully vaccinated travelers. Our hospitality and tourism sectors have borne the brunt of restrictions brought on by the pandemic. Every step must be taken to ensure their recovery, and this would be a great place to start. We also need to ensure that vaccine credentials can be valid on both sides of the border, and similar rules apply to all forms of travel. Especially with the U.S., we need to renew our partnership on border policy and innovation for the long term. Vancouver is a global city, the gateway to Cascadia and the Asia Pacific. And in fact, this hotel that we're in today opened in 2010 as we opened our arms and welcomed the world at the 2010 Olympic Games. For our economy and our city to thrive, we want to welcome the world again. Vancouver businesses have been patient, and we are ready to welcome the world. The reopening of the land border was a great first step and one very welcome. But the government needs to follow through now and remove the unnecessary, cumbersome additional step of the PCR tests that impedes business and tourism travel so that families can reconnect and the economy can recover. Thank you. I'd like to call on next Mike McLeod, the Director of the BC Hotel Association.
Thank you, Bridget, and good morning, everyone. I'm Mike McLeod, Director of Member and Business Development for the British Columbia Hotel Association. Before I begin my remarks this morning, I would like to take a quick moment to thank the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable for inviting the British Columbia Hotel Association to participate at this event. The BCHA is focused on advocating for the interests of BC's accommodation industry. We represent 80,000 hotel rooms in the province and well over 60,000 employees. We act as a bridge between the hospitality sector and the BC's broader business community, and we are committed to restoring BC's $13.8 billion tourism sector, of which hotels represent $4 billion. Over the past 19 months, our members have seen their revenues decrease significantly as they've dealt with the seemingly endless decrease in the number of visitors to British Columbia. From lockdowns to border closures to travel bans and stay-at-home orders, the tourism industry has been one of the hardest hit throughout the pandemic, and few have felt these devastating effects more so than BC's hotels. In 2019, Vancouver welcomed over 11 million overnight visitors, contributing $14 billion in total revenues to the Metro Vancouver economy and supporting over 104,000 full-time jobs. By comparison, last year in 2020, that revenue fell 70%. Despite high vaccination rates and stable case counts, our collective return to normal is proving more difficult than it needs to be. This is largely a result of leftover travel rules from the start of the pandemic, really before mass vaccination and low case counts. There has been significant progress, and we applaud the federal government for the headway made on borders, but we really need to close the loop on all of this, paving the way for us to build back better. Here in BC, and particularly in Vancouver, we rely on international travel. In normal times, Vancouver sees millions of visitors who sustain our hotels and the businesses operating in the travel and tourism space. More so than others, BC's hospitality sector is heavily dependent on international travel, and despite the broad availability of vaccines and a stable COVID-19 case count, and hospitalizations across the country, many of our members are facing another winter season of staff cutbacks, low revenues, and decisions by foreign guests to stay home. As long as fully vaccinated foreign visitors continue to face unnecessary restrictions, this will continue to be the case, and businesses will continue to suffer. As Bridget just outlined a moment ago, we really need the federal government to make common sense changes to the rules facing British Columbia's hotels, as well as the families and communities that they support. This may sound remote, but these policies have made real impacts on ordinary British Columbians. Who do these policies impact? Our local businesses, our hotel employees, and their families continue to wait for return to normal. It's on behalf of these hotels and our employees and the families that they support that we join with the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable today to call on the federal government to remove the pre-departure PCR test for fully vaccinated international visitors. Our local economy depends on it. This one simple measure, in keeping with the Canadian government's expert advisory panel's recommendations, will go some way to make cross-border trips and visits to BC more accessible for families, tourists, and the businesses that make our work possible. Thank you very much, and I'd like to introduce Karen Slejka from Destination Vancouver.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for making the time to join us here today. My name is Karen Slejka. I'm with Destination Vancouver, and our organization supports Vancouver's tourism industry. We help in developing tourism experiences, and we promote tourism within Canada, the United States, and internationally. Vancouver is truly an international destination. Prior to the pandemic, we welcomed millions of visitors to our city each year. International visitors are critical to Vancouver's local economy. These are visitors that come here for business meetings, for business events, and for leisure vacations. Annually, these tourism visits contribute roughly $14 billion to Vancouver and Metro Vancouver's visitor economy and support over 100,000 jobs. But since 2020, the tourism sector has been extremely hit. It's been hit very hard by COVID and the necessary health restrictions that have been put in place to ensure that Canadians stay safe. As a result, our local tourism operators and small businesses in Metro Vancouver have been struggling to stay open and to survive. We are extremely grateful for local and provincial residents and other Canadians who have been traveling to our destination to enjoy Vancouver and to support local businesses. But right now, we need to see the return of international business and leisure travelers, because that is key to keeping our businesses open. It's key to building the immediate and long-term recovery of our visitor economy. This is travel that needs to start now. But there's still a lot of friction for that international visitor, as you've heard today. Mandatory PCR testing for fully vaccinated travelers keeps our international travelers away. The availability of PCR tests complicates the travel experience and adds costs. The added cost of a PCR test makes travel to Vancouver more expensive. That makes us less competitive. With every destination in the world competing for the fully vaccinated traveler, we need our government's support to reduce the obstacles so that we can welcome back our international visitors, not only to Vancouver, but to all destinations in Canada. And we need to make access really easy for these international visitors. The alternative will hurt Vancouver. Less international visitors will continue to impact our local businesses and continue to prolong the recovery of the visitor economy. I just want to give you some perspective. Travelers from the United States bring in nearly double what a domestic traveler spends in our destination. And other international visitors spend nearly 3 times as much as a domestic traveler. Business travelers to Vancouver make up 13% of our overnight visitors and contribute approximately $2.6 billion in tourism revenues. We know that the government is hearing the concerns of our industry, and we ask that they continue to take meaningful action and quick action to make travel for vaccinated travelers less complicated, less confusing, and less expensive. Metro Vancouver businesses are open. We're ready to welcome back our international visitors and ensure a really strong recovery of our visitor economy. Thank you for your time today. I'm now going to ask Claire Newell, President of Travel Best Bets, to join us.
Thank you, Karen. And good morning. And first, I'd like to thank the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable for inviting me here today. My name is Claire Newell. I am the president of Travel Best Bets based here in Vancouver. I started the business 29 years ago and have now built a team of over 270 travel agents. The vast majority of them are women living here in BC and across Western Canada. About 40 of them work in offices, and the others work from home. The past 19 months has been trying for my team, for really everyone. Everyone's reality has changed, and everyone's experience with the pandemic has been vastly different. As we enter a new phase of the pandemic, one characterized by record-setting vaccination rates and low case counts, it's finally time when we can start to expect to see international travelers again. And after 19 months that we've all experienced, our businesses depend on international travel more than ever. Unfortunately, for small businesses here in Vancouver, we haven't seen international travel return. What has already proven to be a difficult 2 summer seasons is evolving into an even more dire winter season. The Greater Vancouver hospitality sector is incredibly dependent on international travel. Many of our restaurants are facing another winter season of staff cutbacks and low revenues without foreign visitors. Many small businesses may not survive the winter, and it really doesn't have to be this way. The federal government's imposition of mandatory PCR testing for fully vaccinated travelers is keeping international travelers away, leaving small business owners here in Greater Vancouver area to fend for themselves. As I understand it, the federal government hired a team of experts to recommend health travel policies. This group did not recommend mandatory pre-departure PCR testing for fully vaccinated travelers. We need the federal government to make common sense changes to the rules so that our businesses can stand a chance. Thank you, and now I'll pass it back to Bridget.
Thank you very much, Claire. We're happy to open it up to questions now, and I will maybe act as a bit of the facilitator here and call on some of the experts here as we need to.
Thank you. So if you do have any questions in the room, if you could approach this mic and let us know where you're from, and then you can direct your questions directly to Bridget or whoever else you'd like to speak to. We'll then move over to the virtual conference line where we'll have questions asked over the microphone. Thank you.
I'm the unvirtual question. I'm Jeremy Hainsworth with Glacier Media. In terms of visitors coming in, if you look at other countries receiving visitors, they have red, yellow, and green statuses, some of them, countries such as the United Kingdom. How do you guys suggest that international quid pro quos between nations deal with such things if Canada is just going to open up the border without arrival tests? You know, all these other countries, such as the UK, are still requiring such things. The UK requires a day 2 test. You know, there's a lot of cooperation going on with all this testing. How do you think Ottawa should deal with that?
You've brought up a couple of great points there, and I'm happy to let my colleagues weigh in here as well, but we need not only to remove the PCR testing, as was recommended by the expert panel. So we are looking to the expert panel for their advice, removing the PCR test for fully vaccinated individuals. As well, we need consistency where we're seeing the similar approach to travel across not only across the country, but across the world as well. So we're talking costly, we're talking cumbersome, and we're talking confusing. So those are 3 things that could be removed immediately with the government's decision to pull the PCR test for fully vaccinated individuals. The expert panel has given a number of recommendations that can be followed. They are the experts, and we strongly recommend that the federal government follows those.
And what about other countries, though?
Well, I think that we would look to the expert panel, to the recommendations that they gave on how Canada would handle this, but it does bring up how other countries are dealing with this, and there needs to be consistent approach. across the world about this, because when we're going into a long weekend here, there is the Remembrance Day statutory holiday, and some people are taking advantage of the shorter week, the work week, to travel. And it's a perfect time to bring this up, where we are going to see people who are deciding not to come to Canada because of the decision around the PCR testing. I don't know if you want to weigh in on any of that. Anybody? Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Shan.
So the United States and United Kingdom, for example, don't have no travel testing requirement. They accept a rapid antigen test for entry into their countries by air as well. What about the change to rapid antigen? It's cheaper, it's simpler, it's faster. Do you think that would be an improvement?
I think we would look to the expert panel on their recommendations, and certainly if there was a removal of any barrier, it would be helpful to encourage more business and tourism travel. The issue that we have with the PCR test, again, is costly and it's cumbersome and it is confusing because there are many tests out there. If you look just at the cost alone, for a family of 4 who are traveling, that can add up to $800 or maybe $1,000 per family, which is really restrictive to coming to visit to Canada. So any step that can be taken to remove barriers would be welcome by travel and tourism sectors and by the business community at large.
Do you have any sense of how many visitors you guys think you're missing out on, especially maybe Americans who would normally drive into Canada? Any sense of how many are just not coming because of what Bridget just said, $800 for a family? Are there numbers at all? Is it hard to quantify because the pandemic's been going on for so long?
Yeah, I can sort of speak to hotel occupancy. We're still, treading water across the province at about 50% occupancy. We are about to go into a ski season. We have many hotel operators in the interior, the Kootenays, areas like that are nervous. They want to welcome Americans back, for example. They want to take advantage of potentially great early season conditions, but they're nervous about reaching out to those guests about coming and making a last-minute decision because these barriers are in place. So the short answer is, and someone alluded to it earlier, our business has been propped up by Canadians and regional visitors helping our hotels, but the reality is there's no recovery until we can open the borders successfully and free of friction.
Good morning. We've heard from business groups in the past about getting rid of some of these hurdles, and the response by the federal government has been, look, we leave it up to the science table and the health table. Asking them in response to today's story, in today's press conference, their response will predictably be, once again, it's up to the science table, and the science says it's not yet time to get rid of these PCR tests. What's the response by your group to that?
Excuse me. Well, I think, again, in some of our comments we've made, we've been extremely patient as a business community. You look around at other sectors that are thriving. I walked by several film crews on the way over here today. There's businesses that are thriving that we know that there's areas of the economy that are growing. Our sector has not. We've been in sort of a stagnant standstill. Speaking for the hotel sector, we have been nothing but supportive in terms of our support of the health measures and the science. But at the same time, it's time, and our patience is sort of starting to run a little bit thin. And I think we just need to sort of allow our business to get on with it, and this is a step forward. If there's an intermediary step, such as antigen testing, we certainly support that, but the less friction, the better.
So then the implication is that the livelihood of these businesses should take priority over some of the health and science-based decisions by the government. Is that what you guys are saying then?
No. As I mentioned earlier, our health, our support for the health measures and the science behind those has been steadfast from day one. We just feel like we would like the fair opportunity based on what we know now versus what we were dealing with 18 months ago.
Thank you.
Sorry, maybe I could also just add, once I get my mask off my earring, women would know that challenge. We're very clear that science and public health is the top priority. And the business community, the tourism travel associations and industry right across Canada has been very clear on this. The expert panel itself has said that PCR testing is not required, should not be required for fully vaccinated travelers. That is what we are looking to. And so if the expert panel is recommending that, we call on the federal government to follow the science and the guidance on that and to make the change to reduce the friction.
Brent Stafford with RegulatorWatch.com. This is to kind of the group. Has there been lasting damage specifically with American visitors, do you think, with Canada's image of being welcoming? Because if that tie breaks, which has likely been breaking, can it ever be recovered?
Thank you for the question. Prior to the pandemic, the United States was Vancouver and Canada's largest international market. So to actually say that it's an important is an understatement. It is a critically important market for Vancouver and all destinations in Canada. And so to know whether or not, what's the lasting impact, we don't know right now. But what I can tell you that in our destination in 2020, we saw 193 different business meetings and events canceled in our destination. And that was because of where we were at that time. But what we need to do now is bring that business back into our destination. And what we're sharing is that our challenge is the fact that there is that inconsistency around the PCR testing for travelers coming in, Americans coming up here. And when they're looking at rebooking that business for our destination, it just makes this a little bit more complicated. It makes it more difficult. And so it's just easier to go someplace else. And those are those big events that our destination is so reliant on, as well as the individual travelers and people traveling with their families. So it's hard to actually know what the lasting impact is going to be right now. That is something that we have to continue to monitor very, very closely. But what we're saying is listen to what the advisory panels are saying, and as quickly as we can we remove this mandatory testing for, the PCR test for our fully vaccinated travelers and make Canada, make our destination, make Metro Vancouver more accessible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jawad Siddiqui from Omni Television. In terms of how quickly this requirement should be removed, what are you demanding? I guess in terms of timeline, is there a point beyond which you would consider this a lost opportunity? You mentioned winter here.
I'll take that question. Happy to have my colleagues weigh in as well. But this is an urgent decision that needs to be made by the federal government. Every week and every month that goes on, we are losing business and tourism travel in our region. And those people are choosing to go elsewhere. So we did say that in 2019, $14 billion in revenue came to our region because of travel. We had over 100,000 jobs that relied on this. We know we're losing out. So there is a pressing need for the federal government to act and to act soon.
I'll just add to that from a business perspective in terms of groups and events and those sorts of things that fill these hotels that are nearby us here. The lead time that those events need to book is, in some cases, the bigger the event, the longer the lead time, so 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If we're not in front of those clients now, free of barriers, people may make a decision to come to Vancouver, for example, or other parts of BC, eventually, but that decision could be now 2025, 2026. So there's that sort of urgent need, as Bridget mentioned, to sort of free those barriers so that even the longer term business can come back sooner, which may not be for a year or two, but it's better than 2026.
And if it's okay, I have a follow-up as well. In terms of your communication channels with the government, what channel are you actively using? Is there any ongoing communication on this front with the government? Have you heard anything from them? Apart from this press conference, obviously.
I'll let Bridget handle it.
The Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable has, for the entire time of the pandemic, been communicating to federal government on issues that impact travel and business tourism. And we continue to dialogue with the government, and we are ready to speak to them at any point and offer our recommendations and our thoughts. I would say that in the time of the pandemic, there has been more collaboration than ever between business and government, and so I hope that those communication channels remain open and would encourage the federal government to look to the message that we're saying from a very broad-based across Canada. We are talking about travel and tourism and the business community at large, and so the message is loud and clear, and we are ready to speak to them at any point.
Thank you.
Hopefully this is an easy one. Which specific branch of governments have you been dealing with?
As a group, we have been speaking to a number of groups. I would say it's been broad-based, Jeremy, that we continue to speak to them publicly and privately. We have been sending letters and different kinds of communication. And we know that through the pandemic, there has been collaboration even amongst government ministries. And so this has been a broad-based approach. And so I would choose a number of different ministries and even through the Prime Minister's office as well.
If there are no any other questions in the room, we'll head it over to the operator. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. At this time, we have no questions.
Great, and that concludes the press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.